I just think I just selected the buttons.
Hi, hello.
Hello, how you doing,
Hello.
Luce?
It's okay. Could be way better, but it's not that bad.
What could be better?
I'm a bit exhausted after my university. I mean, I've just ended my last semester, so I'm a bit tired and exhausted and so on.
I see. I think you should be fine, actually. Let me know if you see if it's starting. It should be starting any moment, Eric.
I see it now. Let me see if the audio is working too. Hold on a second.
All right. Check. What? I don't want a repeat performance of the Material World 3, where it's just like, oh man.
Yeah,
I
I can hear it. I can
it's
hear it.
such a good. It's such a shame that that happened to that one because I felt it was one of the best discussions of out of all the three sessions. But yeah, my
Yeah,
voice with
that's
my microphone was completely blank, so it's pretty much unlistenable because you can't really like half of the video is just silent. It's very sad.
yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
And I
So
remember that time I was like, oh, I'll listen to this later. And when you posted, uh, and I was a little sad. Yeah,
sorry, you cut out for a second there, I think. What did you say? For me at least. I don't know if it was the same.
that time I couldn't make it at all, and I had thought to myself, oh, I'll listen to the YouTube, and then
Yeah. Yeah. Was that like the one time you couldn't make it? Anyway,
well, no,
it's
I have missed a lot, but since you've done the YouTube, maybe.
hmm well, yeah, now I just have like one more thing to check pretty much before I go live. It's just like I just to check my microphone feedback. But yeah, pretty much it was pretty instantaneous once I noticed it. I noticed like the microphone wasn't giving feedback on OBS, and I'm like, oh, pretty sure I'm gonna be quiet on the video. So anyway, how you doing, Q? Uh, so maybe we should just start. I think we have enough people. We can start. How far did you get, by the way, Luce?
74 pages.
Okay, that's good enough. Honestly, it's this so this book is like just pretty much very reminiscent to David Graeber. Not sure if you guys have ever read that, but it's The Dawn of Everything is like a lot of the same references and the ideas behind it, including like from anthropology, are like revisited upon in this book in a lot of ways. And I think it's almost like it's not quite the same, but it's pretty nearly the same. But still very good. I mean, I like it a lot. So the basic idea is Goliath's curse. There's these what Goliaths are to begin with. They're like large states based on inequality and coercion. So empire. So it's basically the idea that throughout history that states arise from certain conditions and that they become coercive and unequal. And Goliath's curse is the idea that eventually uh, because they're very fragile because they don't serve everybody. They're very extractive, right? So uh, there's nothing like keeping people together. So if you have a bad weather event or climate event, that they tend to collapse. And he goes through a lot of examples and pre European colonization Americas like Cahokia. It's Cahokia is in the Mississippi River. Is it River Valley? I don't know where that is nowadays, but yeah, it was one of the first it was one of the pre-European cities that was existed around like 1050 to 1350, and it pretty much disintegrated because it became so extractive and abusive, I guess you could say. So Um, Teotihuacan is another one. That was in central Mexico. Alblan, the Zapotec civilization. I don't know where that is exactly. Çatalhöyük. I'm doing my best to pronounce these, by the way. I'm not going to be perfect, but whatever. Is that was in modern Turkey, modern day Turkey. That was a really old one, Neolithic period, so 7500 to 5700 BC. Tiwanaku, uh, Lake Titicaca in the Andes Mountains, and San Lorenzo. This was in the Gulf Coast of Mexico. So yeah, he goes through basically a lot of these cities as examples of saying like these were all places where there was a development of civilization that that was probably usually at first very equal and egalitarian, and over time became extractive and unequal, and then eventually they kind of just disintegrated. And so these are like former Goliaths that kind of just fell and were and collapsed. Basically, these are so. First off, does anyone have anything to add so far? Luce, did you have anything? Or I don't know, Eric, did you read? Or by chance, or did you get a chance? Or
No, I didn't have a chance to read.
It's no big deal.
I'm here to learn from you guys. Yeah.
That's totally fine.
One thing you said made me think of that you can kind of describe it as your state cannot collapse if you don't have a state.
Yeah, so pretty much, yeah. And he goes through this idea that it's not necessarily inevitable that states become unequal and coercive. I think that's another idea he was trying to disassemble at a certain point, that it's inevitable that states become this way, but also he does seem to kind of suggest that there's an environmental factor behind it, like certain places tend to be develop less coercive states, and they tend to be where people um, have non-lootable resources, for example, and non-caged land like mountainous land like Afghanistan, which I thought was pretty interesting. There's something called Goliath fuel he talks about. I thought was interesting. There's three things, like he said, that are Goliath fuel, like conditions for inequality, like it's lootable resources. So like basically like agriculture that's there's certain types of agriculture that are more lootable than others. So like wheat and something like that are very lootable. Like they can be taken easily and stolen. But then there's other kinds of agriculture that are less obvious, like potatoes. Caged land is like basically uh, uh, it's a geography that it can be easily where people can be easily controlled, pretty much. And another third condition was monopolizable weapons. So I thought that was interesting. Oh, hey, Mythos, how you doing? So good, cool. I'm assuming you've are you finished with the book already by chance, or did you? Because it's been a while since we
I
started.
finished it already. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So sometimes it's hard getting everybody on the same page here, but it's fine. Hopefully you remember something. So yeah, we're just going over the first section of Goliath's curse. But so he's pretty much laying out the idea of what a Goliath is, what makes it, the environmental conditions that make Goliath, and what inevitably within them like kind of leads to their downfall in terms of when there's a climactic event or something like that, what leads to their failure. So that's basically state failure, pretty much, or societal collapse. But another thing he said that I thought was interesting was societal collapse is not necessarily bad, because, as he says, like history is written by rich people or wealthy people. So he kind of suggests from their perspective, maybe societal collapse, like the fall of Rome was this terrible disaster, but maybe for the slaves or people who weren't doing so well under Rome, it wasn't such a disaster, right? So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's. I wouldn't have thought of that myself.
I mean, it makes sense. The people who are able to write and make the written record are probably going to be upper class and educated. So, um,
Yes.
There's a lot that gets lost in history. But yeah, the accounts that we have are probably going to be from or representing wealthier interests. Basically, is the idea. Um, but yeah, I this is like the third or fourth book I think now that's talking about Cahokia, and I'm like, okay, this must be a really hot subject now because like everybody's talking about it. But it's really interesting. I'm not I'm not complaining because it's I didn't know about it until David Graeber's book, but and I'm looking at where it
Yeah,
is right
I found
now. Go ahead.
it's in, I think, Illinois,
It's
maybe
It's in
somewhere around
Illinois.
there.
Yeah, it's in Illinois.
It's funny because like I had the same thing. It's like I'd never heard of it before recently, and it's popped up another time. And if you ask anybody in America, I guarantee nobody's heard of it except maybe people that live right around there, which is weird, right?
Yeah, well,
Could you write
I
it out in the chat to see what that is? How it's spelled?
yeah, sure. Uh, I think it's become a really hot thing to talk about in anthropology circles because oh hey Q because yeah pretty much it's been post for me my experience has been post books written post 2020s and that touch on anthropology in some way or form, so it's become like a very I don't know people like to
The
talk about it.
mound people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Okay.
they were an example of a so like when Europeans arrived in the sorry in what's now United States, they found like what can be described as like tribal people that weren't they didn't have civilization. Um, but the idea with this is, Cahokia and maybe other examples in North America, there were like right before they came, pretty much they were going through this period of like centralization, and they had states, like, or the beginnings of states at least, right? But that they chose against that because they became coercive and unequal, and they didn't like that. So they were going through this kind of natural period of like societal dispersion, I guess. So they became more focused on small groups and stuff. And from an anarchist or anthropologist perspective, maybe that's a good thing. I think it is, but um, yeah, he said something also interesting too. He's like, it was pretty certain. Another thing that contributed to it was the Little Ice Age during the it would be during the 16th, 17th centuries. That kind of he it's also very the author here is very much into the idea that environment is like a big determining factor of these things as well. So he theorizes, if there hadn't been Europeans coming, that that Native Americans would have like surely after the Little Ice Age developed their own civilizations again. I thought that was interesting. I feel like I'm talking too much. Anybody else have anything to say?
One thing that just reminded me, and like I'll try not to jump ahead,
Go.
but if I accidentally mix something up, forgive
It's
me.
no, it's no big deal.
But one thing he talked about with these kind of Paleolithic, pre-agricultural people is one idea. We've heard all this usual stuff like egalitarian and all that, which is fine. But the interesting thing I thought was he explains or emphasizes how fluid they are between each other, that they're not just these isolated bands roaming around, and that happened to interact, that because they had extended kin lines, like literally across continents, that they would migrate to and fro and intermingle. And if there was a disaster in one area, because they had those relationships, they could, shack up with the other group to survive. Where like Neanderthals didn't do that; they were much more isolated, and that might be a reason why they fell apart and died out.
Yeah, that reminds me of a related point where he said that contrary to like the conception that people were, or humans were very initially tribalistic, like we stayed among groups of kin, and didn't mingle much with strangers. That actually that part of our evolution is us being very open to and able to like coexist with strangers. Pretty much, like tribal groups were not like inbred, right? They were like these groups of strangers lots of times. So like that's like a very core thing about our social evolution as well.
Yeah, I think in that same vein, I think he's trying to say that we're more prone to say, "Hey neighbor, you're cool," rather than be confrontational with them. That our first impulse is to, "Hey, let's get along" first,
Yeah.
rather than the other.
It's also, I would imagine, likely, like in many animal species, that males would go out and leave their tribe and maybe find and integrate with other tribes, like you see in other animal situations where they kind of like separate out from their birth group. So I would imagine that humans also had similar behaviors.
Yeah. I think it was I don't know if it's if he mentioned the difference between males and females, but typically also like if you're talking about like an egalitarian situation, there would be less I think it also comes with like less female restriction. Like females would also be probably free to travel and do the same thing. But
Yeah, is that
uh,
about, like, well, at least in the animal kingdom, it's not like about freedom. It's just there is this like sort of tendency to see that the females of like, you could see it in, I think, uh, like the felines is a good example, where the females will generally stay and maintain the family group, and then a male of age, if he can't like find a mate nearby, will just leave and go and make his own way. Whereas like you will see generations of females staying together. I don't know. It's just a comment there. Sorry.
that's okay. Um, it's possible. I don't. My instinct is that it would be is that in like small bands that there'd be less. If there's less coercion generally, there's also less female coercion, but it might differ from place to place. I don't know. By the way, if anybody is interested in the cities I mentioned, maybe I'll share my screen or something. I can also put them up here really quickly for people interested on the stream. But here, let me share this real quick. Entire screen here. This one. I'll just post that up for anybody interested. So
Did you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering, did you mention another important or interesting thing about agriculture? Like things that they would grow, on things being lootable or not? Did you already talk about this?
Yeah. I mentioned, I think just as you were coming in, I was talking about Goliath fuel. So there's like three things that are what he calls Goliath fuel, or like preconditions for coercive states, which kind of fits into the environmental determinism that he's kind of. It's also kind of like really a central part of his thesis is like there has to be lootable resources. So some crops are more lootable than others. Wheat, for example, is much more lootable than potatoes. So like if you have a society relying on wheat, it's probably it's more prone to be of coerce or develop into a coercive, unequal society. Um, the other one was caged land. So like if you have, I don't know what or I forget what he defined as caged land, but like I'm supposing it's a place where there's a lot of population density, or that's prone to have a high population density. And the third one was monopolizable weapons.
Yeah, yeah. Like the grain thing was really neat to me as well because it's like, you know, he describes it as it advertises itself when it's ready to be plucked. So if you're a thief or you want to take control, you just swoop in when it's harvest time, and you can store that and transport it, literally for decades if you want. It doesn't go
Hmm.
bad. And versus those others that you mentioned where, yeah, you can't see them, you could hide them, so to speak, and they can grow in non topography that's less accessible than a big open field, and that helped as well to keep those at bay.
Yeah. How do you feel about the determinism here, by the way? Because yeah, on the one hand, all this makes sense, but on the other hand, it's like, okay, there seems to be like, okay, he's building a case for this thing happening under certain conditions. Does it bother you that it feels kind of very deterministic, that this is like bound to happen or in under certain conditions?
Well, I think he gets to a place of like, obviously this is a warning for us in the end,
Yeah, sure.
but I got the sense that it wasn't absolutely determinate, but it's more like, hey, this is a pattern that, even though he is setting it up like this is a pattern that does happen over and over, I think he's saying more that because we can recognize it now, because we have that pattern recognition, we can avoid the pitfalls that they didn't have the luxury of history to review.
Okay.
Like we have the big scope of picture where they only saw their immediate societies and maybe the ones right before them or something. And they just always
That's
thought, yeah, we can do it again better. And we were kind of doing that now, but maybe we'll be, who knows?
Yeah, sorry, hold on. I'm just gonna end the stream real quick because, or not the stream, but the sharing of the screen because it was getting a little choppy there on my end. Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe he goes into it later in the book, but yeah, it is always a question like for me because I'm actually reading another book like simultaneously on environmental determinism by Peter Frankopan, and yeah, he's kind of it feels like the same thing being said over and over again, like the environment determines the outcome here, and that it happens over and over again. But yeah, I'd be interested if he goes into like, okay, do we have a choice in the end here, or is this like just kind of like destined to happen? Uh, I do think we have there's a choice. You can choose how to manage things. But yeah, like for example, how we manage like AI and
Well,
our the modern development of modern technologies.
right. He talks about that specifically in other kind of, here's some measures of general concepts to do to avoid being a collapsible Goliath or becoming one at all or something like that.
Right.
So he gives a pseudo prognosis at the end, or what do you call it? Prescription, I mean.
Right. Did you find that he was like fairly optimistic in the end, or is he kind of like is he in between, more in between for you?
I mean, you'll have to decide how it feels to you because I think you could read it either way. I mean, it's kind of like there's optimism if you want it. Here it's like he's got the table open. It's over there if you want it, but it's also collapse over there if you're not wanting it or whatever.
Yeah, I mean the other part of this
So
was like, yeah, it is in between for sure, yeah. And but he does mention a few things. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm sensing some optimism here. He's talking about like the wisdom of crowds, which you could very easily talk about how crowds are delusional. They tend to be delusional or whatever. Um, but also I don't know if you were here when we mentioned I mentioned the point about societal collapse like not necessarily being a bad thing, that when societies collapse, like historically at least, it's seen as a disaster because wealthy people are the ones that wrote about it, like, oh, this is a terrible thing. Like for an oligarch, societal collapse is a disaster because they're losing their power, right? So uh but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because I think even, I mean, obviously he's saying 99% is more like, a guesstimate, it's not an actual number, but he probably means like the vast majority of people literally, wind up okay because they're essentially freed from the prison of that Goliath when it collapses. They're
Mhm.
back to sort of how they should be, even though it kind of, momentarily sucks, but it kind of works out for them.
Yeah, so I don't know. Did it come off to you? To me, like it's coming off as a little bit. Like I don't know how familiar you are with like anthropologists, but they're very anarchist adjacent. So did this come off to you as like anarchist at all? It's like to me, it kind of like did kind of like this is like. I mean, his central thesis is that you know extractive, centralized states that are unequal and coercive and extractive are really bad things, and we should guard against that. And that actually, it's when people are when there's are more democratic and dispersed, it's not as bad as we think. And actually, those are more resilient situations when people have more autonomy and a say in their lives. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he categorize himself as anarchist, but if that just means, the antithesis of organized civilization, then yeah, he's probably saying that, whatever your label you want to put on it.
okay.
Or at least maybe not civilization period, but he's more or less equating what we would call high civilization with a Goliath, right? So it's kind of hard to use the word civilization because you could also pare it down and mean like, these not so Goliath-like interconnected structures. But I think he says by that point it's kind of too late because they will emerge into the Goliath over time. So maybe he is kind of more on the anarchist side.
Yeah, because from what I remember from Graeber, one of the main points was like having a big city, for example. Like there's plenty of examples, and the examples you give in Ukraine where you had an agglomeration of people, like 10,000 plus people, and it didn't develop into a strict hierarchy. Like there wasn't like a centralized structure with that kind of suggests that there was someone who hoarded wealth and political power. Um, Whereas before those were discovered or made known to the general community, that people had the idea that once you get past a threshold of like 10,000 people, um, inevitably you're going to have like coercive extractive institutions. But what Graeber said was that it doesn't necessarily need to be the case, and so I'm wondering, curious if he's going to say something similar. I mean, he does seem to say something similar, but also he's giving um it's you have to be careful. I think that's why you have to be careful with environmental determinism as well, like how far you go with that or how you apply that. Not to say that I disagree with him, but because it does there's it does seem to be an issue of like uh autonomy there.
Yeah, when he gets into I think it's in the next part when they're talking about empire. I think a lot more of it becomes clear of how much man is doing this to himself with the high, specifically the people at the top, because as they gain these powers and they extend to empire, they get, you know reasons that you'll read about why they kind of start to disintegrate. But there seems to be, I guess what I'm pointing out, there seems to be a tipping point that you wouldn't necessarily have to go over, but people tend to do. But if you have foresight, then maybe you can avoid it.
Okay. Yeah, like I'd be interested to say if I'd be interested to see if he would say that like you could have a place with all three of all, like a lot of Goliath fuel, but still choose to make a different type of situation or a different type of society. Like it doesn't need to be like that's why I guess I do like the term Goliath fuel. Like this is like these are preconditions to centralization and coercion, but it doesn't need to be that way, I suppose. But I don't know. Is there anything else that you remember from the first section, or I mean, I guess it might be hard for you to remember. I don't know how long it's been since you've read, but um,
And yeah, so the exact dividing line is a little blurry, but I just something like we as humans seemed, if I recall, very willing and at least had the freedom to abandon any hints of a Goliath forming. We just said, nah, fuck that. And we could disperse. And so that seemed to happen a lot from what he's describing. This kind of like earlier agricultural era at least. But it would, once you get into like the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians and the Chinese, that's when kind of that it hits that escalation ramp. So, anyways, I guess like I guess he's pointing out that we used to avoid this all the time. We saw it coming and we did not like it, but there was reasons, etc., to be explored of why that didn't stay that way.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's not like a revolutionary idea anymore, but like for a lot of people, the idea that you can just exit or leave a coercive and unequal situation seems like completely foreign or outside of the idea. Like when you think about how long certain cities in Europe have existed, like Rome, and even though Rome did go through cycles, I guess, but the fact that French, English, and all these unequal societies existed for so long, I feel like from a European perspective, people feel like this is like inevitable and once it's done, like you can't leave, like you can't undo it. But one thing that I appreciate about looking at indigenous examples like these, and even in Turkey, the examples in Turkey too, like Çatalhöyük, I don't know how to pronounce that, but like time and again, actually, you can they show that you can you can like just like leave. But it's I guess that's a really that's part of the idea that's interesting and needs to be talked about more from this book too.
Yeah, one other thing you just mentioned when you talked about Rome was that he brought up, I guess is obvious in hindsight, but I hadn't thought about it, is we in Western society tend to lionize or make heroic places like Rome and Egypt
Yeah.
and the Mesopotamians. They all collapsed. Why do we
Yeah.
do that? Why do we think they good things? They weren't.
Yeah, and it was a good
Just
thing.
have-
I certainly don't like. I think Rome is a terrible was a terrible thing to happen. Firstly, but I think Graeber convinced me of that. But yeah, I agree. Like even I mean, even if you think about the impact of Rome on successive empires and kingdoms in Europe, like everybody is trying to remake Rome. Everyone is looking back towards Rome specifically as this great example of a civilization. But yeah, they, like you said, they collapsed
Make
also
Rome
for a
great
reason.
again.
Yeah, including
Yeah,
the
it's just
not National Socialist Party of Germany, by the way, too. But
Make Rome great again, great for the first time.
Make it the way it should have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, he's saying, you know, we look at Rome as sort of like the pinnacle of civilization. You know, this is they at a time, you know, before us, man, they did it. But yeah, all those you could go into all the reasons why it was a terrible thing and it collapsed. I mean, that's just a fact of history.
Well, I think my idea now is like the Republic era, the era of the Republic was like an oligarchic time, and then post Julius Caesar when it became like the emperor or empire. I don't know how you would call that, but the post dictatorship era is like just a monarchic, like extractive monarchy. But even before Julius Caesar came about, it was already I think an oligarchic, very corrupt place for a wealthy for a wealthy class of citizens and senators.
It was also built on the back of slaves too.
Yeah, okay, we went through this before, but the Roman slavery, um, Roman slavery went through an evolution. It's really interesting. Who talked about that? Was that Graeber in Debt? I don't remember. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, probably yes.
do you remember what he said? Like Roman slavery kind of it kind of expanded and exploded after like what, after Julius Caesar, or after during the latter part of it, or
I don't remember.
yeah. um yeah, I'd have to revisit my notes for that, but I think maybe I will for next week. But he said something. Yeah, he had some really interesting insights onto Roman slavery. But obviously, you know, it was a very particular type of slavery as well, because you could be a wealthy person from Greece, and being a slave is not necessarily a bad situation for you, because you're basically a tutor or like a teacher for some wealthy Roman noble family. Um, so it's and also slaves were the literate ones. They were the ones that were writing everything, or recording everything and writing things down, like Seneca. Seneca probably uh, Seneca's writings are, you know, because his slave. We have Seneca's writings because of his slave who wrote them down, I think, is the idea.
It's almost like there's a blurry line between slavery and employment too.
Yes.
Yep, pretty much. Pretty much. I think that's something I wish we talked about more today, is like we didn't really, like, just because you're getting rid of one form of slavery doesn't mean that you're not you don't have other, that the coercive institutions have gone away, or the
I mean, writing something for somebody is kind of like being a secretary.
yeah, pretty much. They were secretaries, right? But they were also educated, uh and there's, I think, the what Graeber mentions, like there's different type of slaves in Roman society. So it was a what's the idea there? I don't know. I really have to revisit my notes there, but it wasn't necessary. It didn't necessarily describe your social position. Um,
I remember him talking that basically in the past slavery was not associated with endless work for free, but instead was associated with a separation from your family. And you basically, when you are a slave, that means that you do not have any kin around you and basically no connections whatsoever to your people.
yeah, it's social death was his
Yes.
term. Is it pretty much, which is which is a good way to put it. Like once you're severed from your kin and social relations, pretty much you become a commodity, pretty much, because nobody has any attachment to you, basically, and so they don't view you as a person anymore. They view you're just kind of like someone taken out of their proper social context. So yeah, that was another thing he mentioned in Africa was the difference between pawns and slaves, where Europeans mistook pawns uh, as slaves, where like you would have pawns who would be like quote unquote, I guess African slaves, but they would still have their social ties and relations. They wouldn't be like completely separate from their social context or separated. But it's been a while since I've read that, so I don't know how much I can go into it. Anyway, so to get back to that, he mentions also Thomas Piketty, which I thought was I really liked. The rate of growth of wealth and assets is greater than the rate of growth of like income or wages, basically. So I thought that was a nice shout out. So yeah, there's actually three ideas I wrote down here related to power. One, that there's different types of power. There's like wealth, but then there's also political power. There's the power over life, like the monopoly of violence, all that stuff. And one type of power is conducive towards you. If you have one type of power, it's conducive towards you having another type of power. So like if you have wealth, it easily translates into like you also being able to access weapons and get control of violence, get the control of violence over others. And then the third thing was the Thomas Piketty's point: the rate of growth of wealth is greater than normal income or wages. So
one thing I remember he kind of Kemp lightly touched on, if I'm remembering it right, was when you'd have like these, old startup Goliaths, let's say, the remaining people would develop stories about them that were, these are the bad guys and they did these bad things, and they kind of mocked them. And if they would carry those stories, from through like a few generations at least, I mean, eventually they would get lost, of course. But I thought that was just an interesting idea that they were doing more or less the same thing. Maybe Graeber and others are doing is they're saying, like, you got to keep saying this stuff over and over so it becomes a unified story. People get it, like, because if you tell the average person that, I don't want to say the average person, but I think you understand what I'm saying. I like the idea of the story, I guess is the point I'm saying. If that makes sense.
yeah. Sorry. I think you cut out for a second there. So I at least for me, I didn't get everything you said. Do you mind repeating that?
Well, I was rambling a bit. I was summarizing as like, I like the idea that these people purposely carried a negative story about the corrupt, collapsible people as a warning to other generations. And I'm saying I think
Oh,
that's a good idea that we should continue to do, and that's what I think Kemp and Graeber, are doing in their writings. But we can, so when you hear like these
yeah.
repetitive stories, like the prehistory got it, agriculture got it. It's like, no, you got to really get that built into the system, the common language.
Yeah, and kind of like the mythos of it. So like right now, like where there's a mythos of the glory of Rome, we could say, and there for at least the indigenous peoples, like Cahokia, I don't imagine was like this. It wasn't like this lionized story like Rome. They didn't lionize Rome like they did like Cahokia, or they didn't lionize Rome Cahokia in the same way they did Rome. Sorry, I completely confused myself for a second there. But Cahokia to them was it was a warning. It was kind of a cautionary tale, like be careful giving too much power and centralization to in one place, because yeah, it can become very extractive. Um,
This is related but slightly tangential. But have any of you ever heard of the podcast? It's not on very often, called Death in the Garden.
no, I don't know it.
Well,
Me
there's
neither.
one. There's one. It's they hardly ever do it. Like, it's very sparse. It's this young couple that does. But anyways, they do this one really good story where they're talking about this kind of story outline that I'm talking about, and they have a parable called the canal and the dam, and it's kind of, this sort of fableized version of the people who didn't have dammed up waters and could freely move around, and as the more and more the society kind of stored up the resources, that they got squeezed out. It's just kind of an interesting little thing. I'll find a link to it if I can.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love it. It sounds like it would accompany well with this reading this book as well. So, I'm looking in the chat, by the way, if there's anyone here, like Q, if you want to add anything, if I can read it if you're not available to speak, for example, or if you had anything to add. Um, but yeah, I'm really I'm looking forward to this. I'm thinking it's going to be just another good addition to kind of like this new movement of, like you said, putting a different giving a different narrative to history. And I think that's also very important because we do, like, people like think that they equate Rome with civilization, and that civilization is this great thing that without it. Oh, the other thing we hadn't mentioned was the Hobbesian part of this, which is also, it's also the kind of very touched upon in Graeber's book, that the idea that the people are afraid of leaving civilization, our civilization, quote unquote, because they feel like without it we would live in complete chaos and anarchy, and life would be brutal and short, and we wouldn't you know that the fact that the coercive extractive system is like just a necessary evil. It's a part of the whole deal, the whole package. That's just so to say that all this progress we've made, technological progress, and in health and medicine, and all these improvements, like, well, like, that wouldn't have happened without civilization. That wouldn't have happened without you know good and wise leaders to lead us in the right direction, or whatever. And I think that's another myth or fable that needs to be deconstructed, and I'm really glad that more people are doing that.
I think that the probably most dangerous narrative that we are telling ourselves about history is that, that historicism tale that there's been progress happening all over this time, and our functioning has been greatly increasing with time, and especially during the last, like, I don't know, times of civilization, couple of 100 years, or whatever the narrative wants to say. And I think that this narrative is pretty dangerous, because instead of focusing on like measures of satisfaction and measures of like quality of life, or like egalitarianism, we're instead focusing on a very narrow technological advancements that are supposed to make our lives so much better. But probably if we kind of zoomed out and thought about how it's currently going, then we would realize that that tale is completely wrong, and there hasn't actually been any progress in anywhere. It's just a constant change that's happening.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that like, so much of our technological advancements have happened under, like, under these conditions, situations. I think a lot of people do conflate the idea that the coercive institutions begat the others, but we've also had, um, improvements on the coercive institutions at times in some places. I'm not saying every place, but there's been times where wealth inequality has gone down, and um, certain improvements have been made on the extractive institutions. I'm not saying that they've ever been being close to being solved, but but at the same time, that doesn't hamper technological or progress in other areas, right? They're kind of disconnected.
I feel like maybe you could argue that it's faster, like the advancement is faster under these systems, but then is that better? But yeah.
What you think? You
Yeah,
think
so
that?
some people are arguing.
Go ahead.
So some people are arguing that maybe instead of move fast and break things, we should adopt an approach of move slow and fix things, because we are kind of our progress breaking too many things.
I'm not. I don't know
Yeah, I
if I'm
agree.
convinced that, like, maybe you could make the argument that a certain amount of centralization makes it faster, but I'm not sure that there's any link between like coercion and technological progress. Maybe there is. Maybe I'm. Yeah. Well, now thinking back about like Ferdinand de Lesseps and all, I don't know. Um, maybe there is, but I'm not entirely convinced. Otherwise, but that'd be an interesting thing to think more about. Um, I don't know. Do you guys see that like that there's a link between the two, that technological progress, and progress is kind of like loose quotes here, because you can have technological progress, but that's at the expense of social progress at times. Um,
Maybe one angle is to look from this from an entirely upside down perspective. Whether is it technology that brought us into this state we are in?
Um, I don't think it's quote unquote technology. I think it's the way in which technology was developed in a way that served elite interests. Um, and that's also like that was like the idea of power and progress. Darren Asimoglu. Have you ever read that mythos, by the way? We went through that here.
No.
It's great. You should read it at some point. But yeah, it's the idea that there's not like one. It's not history is not linear for one. Like there's not like one way in which to develop technologies. There's a few ways in which you could develop them. And so like with the example of AI, it's not a matter of like, do we develop it or not? It's the question that he thinks that we should ask, and I think it's probably good to think this way too, is um how in which way should we develop it? How should it be developed? And what do we want it to do? Kind of these kinds of questions. Um, but like for the example of what was the example what were some of the examples he gave during industrialization? That, oh yeah, so like technology was being applied a lot towards towards capitalists, basically, to how to extract more effort, energy, time from their workforce. So there was all sorts of innovations happening on the front of doing that, basically. Uh, the panopticon, for example, all this stuff. Um, but obviously that's still technological progress. There's progress being made in a certain direction, but it's not a very good direction. It's a pretty bad direction. So I feel like that's relevant also to AI, because I don't know, I get like a lot of people are very anti AI these days, and I'm not saying I am too. I also don't know if there's a way that we can completely pump the brakes on it. So I don't know. I mean, I wish there was, honestly, but
Well, I mean, we still have an opportunity to put guardrails on it. Yeah, I don't think anyone wants to crush it or could crush it completely, but I think we're still very much in control of deciding which way it goes if we're smart about it, but to be determined, I guess.
yeah. But so far not good, I would say. So far it's like it's not looking very promising. But yeah, we do need guardrails on it. For me, it's like a different question. Could you and can you? If the question is you can't stop it, then the question of should you stop it, like, just it doesn't matter anymore. Like, if you can't stop it, then you have to start thinking about, okay, what can we do then? So guardrails and also guiding its development are the two next best things for me.
Yeah, one thing, I don't know if you've ever read Christopher Ryan's books. I've heard him on a couple podcasts as well, and someone always brings up this point to him, like, because he's very anti kind of modern civilization, and someone will always point out to him, well, hey, you're talking on a computer, you got air conditioning. He's like, yeah, I don't live out in the woods, that's true. But he goes, but if I were in those other worlds, if that was my new normal, I wouldn't know any different. And I wouldn't think I was under progress, let's say, if I didn't have all this stuff, because I'd presumably have the things that I need, the food, the social connection, a stable environment, etc. So it's kind of somewhat of a myth that we need these technologies to progress when we clearly have lots of history where we didn't need those things and we wouldn't know otherwise if we
True.
were in those times.
There is lots of very conspicuous unnecessary consumption these days. That's something that bothers me. Like, we don't need what do we what's like the best example of this, for example? I don't know. Um, there's lots of like
I can
designers.
easy one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, are you happier
Single-use
every time a new
containers.
cell phone comes out?
What's that?
Hey, what did you say, Eric? Sorry.
I said single-use containers. Like, it's just like some things are so built around convenience, but like they don't like necessarily add very much value. Trying not to use single-use containers is not hard. It doesn't like destroy your life that you can't
Yeah.
just throw everything away. Like it's not at all difficult to adapt to a different way of living. My grandparents, my grandma would almost never use them. She had jars for everything and bought
Yeah.
in bulk and filled the jars. And like, it's just
Same.
like, it's not like complicated to live like that, but we've just, progressed towards something that's actually being very harmful to our environment.
Yeah.
That's very
Do you
true.
need the latest cell phone, right? When we were talking about material world last time, every time you get a new one, that's more dug up stuff when you probably could design one that they do that lasts a lot longer and you don't need every little last upgrade.
Yeah, but and the discussions on plastics was really good too. Because that's a whole nother thing where it's like it's just a byproduct of our use of oil and fossil fuels. Like, the yes, we don't need to use plastics, but it's there. It's a waste material, but is it better to use the waste material, or discard it? And I think uh, actually disposing of waste is preferable in that instance. But um, yeah, that's starting to get into another discussion. But yeah, it's uh it's a tough question. But yeah, single use plastics are definitely a luxury, or not luxury, but an unnecessary consumption for sure. Trying to think of I tend to go towards fashion, like, I don't know, getting the latest people like change their fashion, are very focused on getting very expensive, I don't know, things that they wear or whatever, put on themselves that kind of signal wealth or whatever. I guess you could say the same thing with cars too. Cars are kind of, some people feel like it should get you from A to B, and other people it's definitely a signal of wealth to a certain point. But yeah, there's all sorts of things that that are conspicuous and unnecessary. But
Yeah.
sorry, my dog is bothering me.
Hmm.
she's um
Just curious, I missed the very front end of this. Is everybody else reading the book, or are we the only ones? Or-
no, Luce is. Eric is. Eric's following along with the discussion.
Okay. Just
I'm on
curious.
74 pages.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Luce is also studying, so it's hard.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So we're gonna do section 2 next week. It's kind of the same amount of pages. It's about like 100. It's 100 something, 150 pages, 150, maybe 200.
Yeah, about so.
Yeah. So but actually it goes by really quickly. I find, like, I was worried because it's kind of double what we did for Material World, double the amount of pages, but actually it reads very quickly, so it's not as concerning as I thought.
I will likely not be able to attend next week.
That's okay. There's people.
Yeah, I mean, I've already read it,
here.
so I'm sure I'll be around.
Yeah. Nice. Are there any closing thoughts about
I don't think
this?
so.
Oh, I did
I just-
want to mention the databases he was using. I thought were interesting. I didn't know about those before. There's the CISHAT Global History Databank and Mortality of States. Those were new to me. But
That's right. Yeah, I remember that too. And I've never heard of these. Those sound cool.
yeah, I'd like to look those up and see if I can, if they're available online. See what they say.
Yeah.
Okay. Well. Okay. I guess we'll end it there for this week. Also, I'll end the stream, and I'll just say thanks for coming, everyone. We'll
Yeah,
be
thanks for
here
holding
next
me.
week.